Picture this. In the heart of Southeast Asia, massive stone temples rise from the jungle, their intricate carvings telling stories of god-kings who commanded millions. Meanwhile, across the world, Roman legions march in perfect formation, their eagle standards glinting in the Mediterranean sun as they forge the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. Today, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating debates. Which was more powerful, the mighty Khmer Empire of ancient Cambodia or the legendary Roman Empire? This isn't just about comparing two civilizations, it's about understanding what true power meant in the ancient world. On one side, we have Rome, the empire that gave us gladiators, aqueducts, and roads that still exist today. An empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Middle East. On the other side, we have the Khmer Empire, the builders of Angkor Wat, masters of hydraulic engineering, and rulers of a realm that dominated Southeast Asia for over 6 centuries. But here's the twist. Power isn't just about military might or territorial size. It's about innovation, cultural influence, economic control, and lasting legacy. So buckle up, because we're about to embark on an epic journey through time to settle this debate once and for all. Before we can determine which empire wielded greater power, we need to understand exactly what we're comparing. These two civilizations existed in different time periods, different continents, and faced completely different challenges. But that's what makes this comparison so fascinating and so revealing about the nature of power itself. Let's start with Rome, the empire that needs little introduction. The Roman Empire, at its peak during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, was a Mediterranean superpower that controlled approximately 5 million square kilometers of territory. From the misty highlands of Scotland to the scorching deserts of North Africa, from the Atlantic coasts of Portugal to the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq, Rome's influence was felt across 3 continents. But Rome wasn't built in a day, as the saying goes. It began as a small city-state in central Italy around 753 BCE, according to legend. For centuries, it grew through conquest, diplomacy, and sheer determination. By the time Augustus became the first Roman emperor in 27 BCE, Rome had already conquered most of the Mediterranean world. The empire that followed would endure for over 400 years in the west and more than 2,400 years in the east as the Byzantine Empire. What made Rome truly remarkable wasn't just its size, but its ability to absorb and integrate conquered peoples. Romans were master administrators, creating a complex bureaucracy that could govern diverse populations across vast distances. They built an estimated 250,000 miles of roads, constructed aqueducts that supplied fresh water to cities hundreds of miles away, and created a legal system that influences modern law to this day. Now, let's turn our attention to the Khmer Empire of ancient Cambodia, a civilization that many people know less about, but which was equally impressive in its own right. The Khmer Empire flourished from the 9th to the 15th centuries CE, with its capital at Angkor, in what is now northwestern Cambodia. At its height, during the 12th and 13th centuries, the empire controlled much of present-day Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and parts of Myanmar. The Khmer Empire emerged from earlier Khmer kingdoms and was established by Jayavarman II, who declared independence from Javanese rule around 802 CE. But it was under rulers like Suryavarman VII and Jayavarman VII that the empire reached its zenith. These weren't just kings. They were considered devarajas, or god-kings, divine rulers who served as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. What set the Khmer Empire apart was its mastery of water management and hydraulic engineering. The Angkor region was transformed into a vast network of canals, reservoirs, and rice paddies that could support a population of over 1 million people. making Angkor one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world. This wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. The Khmer engineers created a system that could harvest rainwater during the monsoon season and distribute it during dry periods, essentially conquering the natural water cycle. The empire's crown jewel was, of course, Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century CE. This temple complex covers over 400 acres and represents the pinnacle of Khmer architecture and artistic achievement. But Angkor Wat was just one of hundreds of temples built during the empire's golden age. The entire Angkor Archaeological Park contains over 1,000 temples and monuments, representing one of the most significant archaeological sites in Southeast Asia. But here's where it gets interesting. These two empires defined power in fundamentally different ways. Rome was expansionist and militaristic, constantly seeking new territories to conquer and new peoples to incorporate into its system. Roman power was expressed through military might, administrative efficiency, and cultural assimilation. The Roman motto might as well have been, "Conquer, govern, Romanize." The Khmer Empire, on the other hand, was more inward-focused, concentrating on perfecting their homeland rather than constantly expanding. Khmer power was expressed through monumental architecture, religious devotion, and hydraulic mastery. They didn't need to conquer the world because they had created a perfect microcosm of it in Angkor. This fundamental difference in approach raises crucial questions about how we measure power. Is a more powerful empire one that controls more territory and more people? Or is it one that achieves greater heights of civilization and technological innovation? Is power about quantity or quality? Furthermore, we need to consider the different challenges each empire faced. Rome had to deal with Germanic tribes, Persian empires, and internal civil wars. The Mediterranean world was crowded with competing civilizations, making constant military vigilance necessary. The Khmer Empire, while certainly engaged in warfare with neighboring kingdoms like Champa and various Thai principalities, operated in a different strategic environment. Their primary challenge wasn't external conquest, but internal development, managing water resources, feeding a massive population, and maintaining their elaborate religious and administrative systems. These different contexts shaped how each empire developed and expressed its power. Rome became a military and administrative machine designed for conquest and control. The Khmer Empire became a hydraulic civilization focused on agricultural productivity and religious expression. As we proceed through this comparison, we'll examine both empires across multiple dimensions of power: military might, economic strength, technological innovation, cultural influence, and lasting legacy. We'll see how Roman legions stack up against Khmer war elephants, how Roman roads compare to Khmer canals, and how the Colosseum measures against Angkor Wat. But remember, this isn't just an academic exercise. Understanding these two great civilizations and how they wielded power can teach us valuable lessons about leadership, innovation, and the true meaning of strength. So let us dive deeper into this epic comparison and discover which empire truly deserves the title of more powerful. When we talk about ancient empires, we inevitably talk about military power. After all, you can't build or maintain an empire without the strength to defend it and the force to expand it. So let us dive into one of the most exciting aspects of our comparison: the military machines that powered these two great civilizations. Picture this scene: Roman legions in perfect formation, their red shields locked together like an impenetrable wall, advancing with mechanical precision. Their short swords glint in the sunlight as they chant in unison. Every step calculated, every movement part of a well-oiled military machine. Now imagine the response. Khmer war elephants thundering across the battlefield, their massive forms draped in ornate armor, carrying towers filled with archers. The ground shakes beneath their feet as they charge, striking terror into the hearts of their enemies. This is not just a clash of armies. It's a clash of military philosophies that define two completely different approaches to warfare. Let's start with Rome, because when it comes to military innovation and effectiveness, few civilizations can match the Romans. The Roman legionary system was perhaps the most sophisticated military organization the ancient world had ever seen. A full Roman legion consisted of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 men, divided into centuries of about 80 soldiers each. But numbers alone don't tell the story. It was the training, discipline, and tactical flexibility that made Roman legions virtually unstoppable. Roman soldiers, or legionaries, underwent brutal training that lasted for months. They learned to march 20 miles a day in full gear, to build fortified camps every single night, and to fight as a coordinated unit rather than individual warriors. The famous Roman gladius, a short stabbing sword, was perfectly designed for close-quarters combat in tight formations. Combined with the scutum, a large rectangular shield, Roman infantry could form the legendary testudo or tortoise formation, creating a mobile fortress that could advance under enemy fire. But here's what made Roman military power truly exceptional: their engineering capabilities. Roman armies didn't just fight battles, they built the infrastructure to support conquest. They constructed roads that allowed rapid troop movement, bridges that could span any river, and siege engines that could break down any wall. The famous Roman siege of Masada involved building a massive earthen ramp up the side of a mountain. That's the level of engineering commitment we're talking about. Roman military organization extended far beyond individual legions. They developed a complex logistical system that could supply armies across vast distances, a naval force that controlled the Mediterranean, and auxiliary units that incorporated the best military traditions of conquered peoples. Germanic cavalry, Balearic slingers, Cretan archers, Rome absorbed and integrated diverse military specialties into a cohesive fighting force. The results speak for themselves. Roman armies conquered Gaul, defeated Carthage, subdued Egypt, and pushed the empire's borders to the edges of the known world. They faced every type of enemy imaginable, from Celtic warriors to Persian heavy cavalry to Germanic tribes, and found ways to adapt and overcome. Now let's turn to the Khmer military machine, which was no less impressive in its own way. The Khmer Empire's military power was built around a completely different set of strengths and strategies. Where Romans emphasized discipline and standardization, the Khmer focused on mobility, psychological warfare, and the integration of their unique environmental advantages. The centerpiece of Khmer military power was, without question, the war elephant. These weren't just animals. They were living weapons platforms that could carry multiple warriors and strike fear into enemy hearts. A fully equipped Khmer war elephant could carry a crew of 3 to 4 fighters, a driver, archers, and spearmen, protected by a wooden tower called a howdah. The psychological impact of a charging elephant formation was devastating, often breaking enemy lines before physical contact was even made. But the Khmer military was far more sophisticated than just elephant cavalry. Khmer armies included highly skilled infantry armed with spears, swords, and crossbows, as well as specialized archer units that could deliver devastating volleys from elephant back or from fortified positions. They developed advanced siege techniques, including the use of massive crossbows that could launch heavy bolts capable of penetrating stone walls. What really set Khmer military strategy apart was their mastery of riverine and jungle warfare. The Khmer Empire was built around water, rivers, canals, and seasonal flooding patterns. Khmer military engineers developed shallow draft warships that could navigate the complex waterways of Southeast Asia, allowing them to project power along rivers and coastal areas where other armies couldn't operate effectively. The Khmer also excelled at fortification. Angkor Wat, The Great Walled City, built by Jayavarman VII, featured walls over 26 feet high and a sophisticated defensive system that included moats, gates, and watchtowers. These weren't just military installations. They were integrated into the empire's hydraulic system, serving both defensive and water management functions simultaneously. Perhaps most importantly, Khmer military power was closely integrated with their religious and administrative systems. Khmer kings weren't just military commanders, they were Devarajas, god kings whose authority came directly from the Hindu and Buddhist pantheons. This divine authority allowed them to mobilize massive resources for military campaigns and maintain loyalty even during difficult periods. The scale of Khmer military operations was truly impressive. Historical inscriptions describe armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, massive naval expeditions, and construction projects that required the coordination of enormous workforces. The famous naval battle depicted in the Bayon Temple shows Khmer and Cham fleets locked in combat, with intricate details of ship construction, naval tactics, and marine warfare. But here's where the comparison gets really interesting. These two military systems were optimized for completely different types of warfare. Roman legions were designed for open-field battles and siege warfare in Mediterranean and European environments. They excelled at conquering cities, defeating conventional armies, and maintaining control over diverse populations across vast territories. Khmer military power, on the other hand, was perfectly adapted to Southeast Asian conditions. War elephants that would have been vulnerable on European battlefields were devastating in the jungles and rice paddies of Cambodia and Thailand. Riverine warfare techniques that Romans never needed to develop were essential for controlling the waterways that served as highways in the Khmer Empire. So, which military system was more powerful? The answer depends on how we define military success. Roman armies conquered more territory and defeated more diverse enemies, but they operated over a longer time period and in more varied environments. Khmer armies dominated their region for centuries and developed military technologies and tactics that were perfectly suited to their strategic environment. What we can say definitively is that both empires developed military systems that were remarkably sophisticated and effective within their respective contexts. Roman military power was about standardization, discipline, and adaptability across diverse environments. Khmer military power was about specialization, environmental mastery, and the integration of military force with religious and administrative authority. In our next section, we'll explore how these military capabilities translated into economic power and wealth, because ultimately, military strength means nothing without the economic foundation to support it. Military might means nothing without the economic foundation to support it. Behind every great army stands a sophisticated economic system capable of generating the wealth, resources, and logistical support necessary for sustained power. So let's dive into the treasure vaults of history and examine how Rome and the Khmer Empire built their economic dominance. Imagine walking through the bustling markets of ancient Rome at its peak. The Forum Romanum thrums with activity as merchants from across the known world hawk their wares. Silk from China, spices from India, amber from the Baltic, precious stones from Africa, all flowing through Roman trade networks like tributaries feeding a mighty river. The sound of coins changing hands creates a constant metallic melody as Roman denarii and aurei, the world's most trusted currencies, facilitate commerce from Britain to Egypt. Now picture a completely different scene, the vast rice paddies of Angkor during harvest season. As far as the eye can see, golden rice stalks sway in the monsoon breeze, while an intricate network of canals carries life-giving water to every corner of the empire. This isn't just agriculture, it's economic engineering on a scale that wouldn't be matched until the modern era. The Khmer Empire turned water into wealth, transforming their homeland into the most productive rice-growing region in Southeast Asia. These two scenes represent fundamentally different approaches to economic power: Rome as a trade-based empire and the Khmer Empire as an agricultural powerhouse. Let's start with Rome, because when it comes to ancient economic complexity, few civilizations could match the Romans. The Roman economy was built on three pillars: conquest, trade, and taxation. Each conquest brought new resources, new markets, and new sources of tax revenue. Roman economic success wasn't accidental, it was systematic and strategic. Roman trade networks were simply staggering in their scope and sophistication. Roman merchants operated from Scotland to Sudan, from Portugal to Persia. The Mediterranean became essentially a Roman lake, with Roman ships carrying everything from British wool to Chinese silk. But it wasn't just the Mediterranean. Roman trade routes extended overland to India and China via the famous Silk Road, and by sea to trading posts along the African and Arabian coasts. The scale of Roman commerce was mind-boggling. Archaeological evidence shows Roman coins found as far away as Vietnam and southern India. Roman pottery, glassware, and metalwork have been discovered in sites across Europe, Africa, and Asia. This wasn't just trade, it was economic globalization on an ancient scale. But here's what made Roman economic power truly exceptional: their monetary system. Roman currency was standardized, reliable, and widely accepted. The Roman denarius became the dollar of the ancient world, a trusted store of value that facilitated trade across vast distances. Roman banking systems, though primitive by modern standards, were sophisticated enough to support complex commercial transactions, loans, and currency exchange across the empire. Roman taxation was equally impressive in its scope and efficiency. The empire developed sophisticated methods for assessing and collecting taxes from diverse populations across 3 continents. Tax farming, tribute payments, and customs duties generated enormous revenues that flowed back to Rome. At its peak, the Roman treasury was receiving tribute and taxes from over 50 million people, an administrative achievement that would not be matched for centuries. The economic impact of Roman infrastructure cannot be overstated. Those famous Roman roads weren't just military assets. They were economic highways that dramatically reduced the cost and risk of long-distance trade. Roman aqueducts didn't just supply water to cities. They powered mills, workshops, and industrial operations. Roman harbors, bridges, and warehouses created the physical infrastructure necessary for large-scale commerce. Roman economic success also stemmed from their integration of conquered territories. Rather than simply extracting wealth from conquered peoples, Romans often invested in local infrastructure and development. Roman cities in Gaul, Spain, and Britain became thriving commercial centers that contributed to overall imperial wealth. This wasn't just exploitation, it was economic development on an imperial scale. Now let's examine the Khmer economic model, which was radically different but equally impressive. Where Rome built wealth through conquest and trade, the Khmer Empire created prosperity through agricultural innovation and resource management. The foundation of Khmer economic power wasn't gold or silver, it was rice. The Khmer hydraulic system was perhaps the most sophisticated agricultural infrastructure in the pre-modern world. The empire's engineers created a vast network of reservoirs, canals, and rice paddies that could support a population density that would not be seen again in Southeast Asia until the 20th century. The Western Barai alone, one of several massive reservoirs around Angkor, could hold over 50 million cubic meters of water. This wasn't just impressive engineering, it was economic strategy. By controlling water resources, the Khmer Empire could guarantee multiple rice harvests per year, creating agricultural surpluses that freed large portions of the population for other activities. Artisans, soldiers, priests, and administrators could all be supported by the agricultural productivity of the Angkor region. The economic implications were staggering. Historical estimates suggest that the Angkor region could support a population of over 1 million people, making it one of the largest urban areas in the world at the time. This population density created a massive internal market for goods and services, while agricultural surpluses could be traded for luxury items and raw materials from other regions. Khmer economic power extended beyond agriculture through control of strategic trade routes. The empire sat astride maritime trade routes connecting China, India, and the Middle East. Khmer ports along the coast controlled access to valuable goods like spices, precious woods, and exotic products that were highly sought after in Chinese and Indian markets. The Khmer Empire also controlled significant mineral resources. Archaeological evidence shows sophisticated metalworking operations producing iron tools, weapons, and decorative objects. The empire's control over copper, tin, and gold deposits provided both practical resources and luxury goods for trade. But perhaps most importantly, the Khmer economy was based on sustainable resource management. Unlike empires that exhausted their territories through overexploitation, the Khmer system was designed for long-term productivity. Their hydraulic agriculture actually improved soil fertility over time, while their forest management practices ensured sustainable supplies of timber and other forest products. The economic sophistication of both empires is reflected in their monumental construction projects. Rome's Colosseum, aqueducts, and road network required enormous financial resources and complex logistical coordination. Similarly, Angkor Wat and the hundreds of other temples around Angkor represent massive capital investments that could only be undertaken by an economically powerful civilization. So which empire was economically more powerful? The comparison is complicated by their different economic models. Rome controlled more territory and integrated more diverse economic systems, generating wealth through conquest, trade, and taxation across 3 continents. The Khmer Empire created extraordinary prosperity through agricultural innovation and resource management, achieving population densities and living standards that were remarkable for the pre-modern world. Roman economic power was extensive, spread across vast territories and diverse populations. Khmer economic power was intensive, concentrated in a smaller area but achieving extraordinary productivity and sustainability. What both empires demonstrate is that economic power in the ancient world wasn't just about accumulating gold and silver. It was about creating systems that could generate sustained prosperity, support large populations, and fund the military and administrative apparatus necessary for imperial power. In our next section, we'll explore how these economic foundations enabled remarkable technological and engineering achievements that continue to amaze us today. Now we enter the realm where ancient genius truly shines. The incredible technological innovations and engineering marvels that both empires left behind. These aren't just impressive monuments. They're testaments to human ingenuity that continue to baffle and inspire engineers today. When you see a Roman aqueduct still carrying water after 2,000 years, or stand before the perfect astronomical alignments of Angkor Wat, you're witnessing technological achievements that define what civilization can accomplish. Let's start with a mind-blowing fact. Roman concrete, used in structures like the Pantheon, has actually gotten stronger over time. Modern scientists are still trying to figure out exactly how Roman engineers created a building material that improves with age, while our modern concrete begins deteriorating within decades. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, Khmer engineers were moving millions of tons of stone and water on a scale that wouldn't be attempted again until the modern era, creating hydraulic systems so sophisticated that they supported one of the world's largest pre-industrial cities. These weren't just different approaches to engineering. They were different philosophies about how human technology should interact with the natural world. Roman engineering was, in many ways, about conquering nature through systematic innovation and standardization. Romans didn't just build things, they perfected systems that could be replicated across their vast empire. Take Roman roads, for example. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just a metaphor. It was literally true. The Roman road network consisted of over 250,000 miles of roads, all built to exacting standards that ensured durability, drainage, and ease of maintenance. But here's what made Roman road building truly revolutionary. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. Roman roads were engineered systems that integrated with the broader infrastructure of the empire. Every major road included way stations, bridges, drainage systems, and even standardized mile markers. Roman engineers developed techniques for building roads across every type of terrain, through mountains, across rivers, over marshes, and through forests. The famous Appian Way, built in 312 BCE, is still in use today, over 2,300 years later. Roman aqueduct technology was equally impressive. The empire's engineers built over 400 aqueducts that supplied fresh water to cities across the empire. These weren't simple pipes. They were complex engineering systems that used gravity to transport water across hundreds of miles, maintaining precise gradients that ensured steady flow without erosion or stagnation. The Pont du Gard in France, part of a 30-mile aqueduct system serving the city of Nîmes, stands 160 feet high and demonstrates the precision of Roman hydraulic engineering. But perhaps the most revolutionary Roman innovation was concrete. Roman concrete wasn't just cement. It was a carefully engineered composite material that included volcanic ash, lime, and aggregates selected for specific properties. This allowed Romans to build structures that were previously impossible, including the massive dome of the Pantheon, which remained the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome for over 2,300 years. Roman architectural innovation extended beyond materials to construction techniques. They perfected the arch, developed the vault, and created the dome on a scale never before attempted. Roman buildings weren't just larger than their predecessors, they enclosed space in entirely new ways. The Colosseum, with its complex system of underground passages, elevators, and trapdoors, was essentially an ancient sports complex, with retractable awnings and sophisticated crowd control systems. Roman military engineering was equally advanced. Roman armies didn't just fight, they built. Siege engines, fortified camps, bridges built in days, and siege works that could overcome any defense. Roman military engineers could reshape the battlefield itself. The famous siege of Alesia, where Julius Caesar built concentric walls around both the besieged city and his own army, demonstrates the kind of rapid, large-scale construction that Roman engineering made possible. Now let's turn to Khmer engineering, which approached technology from a completely different philosophical perspective. Where Romans conquered nature through systematic force, Khmer engineers worked with natural systems to create something approaching harmony between human needs and environmental processes. The centerpiece of Khmer technological achievement was their hydraulic engineering system around Angkor. This wasn't just irrigation, it was environmental engineering on a scale that staggers the imagination. The Khmer created a complex network of canals, reservoirs, and rice paddies covering over 1,000 square kilometers. The Western Beret alone is over 5 miles long and 1.2 miles wide, making it one of the largest artificial lakes in the ancient world. But here's what makes Khmer hydraulic engineering truly remarkable. It worked with, rather than against, natural water cycles. The system was designed to capture and store monsoon rainwater, then distribute it during dry seasons. This required incredibly precise understanding of topography, hydrology, and seasonal weather patterns. Modern satellite analysis has revealed that the Khmer engineers modified the landscape itself, creating artificial hills and valleys to optimize water flow. The precision of Khmer engineering is perhaps best demonstrated by Angkor Wat itself. This massive temple complex isn't just architecturally impressive, it's also a sophisticated astronomical instrument. The temple's orientation and proportions correspond to important astronomical cycles, with the central tower representing Mount Meru, the center of the universe in Hindu cosmology. During the spring equinox, the sun rises directly over the central tower when viewed from the western entrance, a feat of engineering and astronomical knowledge that required precise calculations and perfect execution. Khmer stone-cutting and construction techniques were extraordinarily advanced. The massive stone blocks used in Angkor Wat and other temples were cut with such precision that many joints require no mortar, fitting together with tolerances that would be impressive even by modern standards. Some of these blocks weigh over 8 tons, yet they were lifted and positioned with mathematical precision using only human labor and simple machines. The Khmer also developed sophisticated techniques for moving massive amounts of earth and stone. Archaeological evidence suggests that the construction of Angkor Wat required moving over 5 million tons of stone, much of it transported from quarries over 25 miles away. This was accomplished using a combination of water transport, rollers, and ramps, engineering solutions that required careful planning and enormous organizational capability. Perhaps most impressively, Khmer engineers integrated their technological systems in ways that served multiple purposes simultaneously. The same canals that irrigated rice paddies also served as transportation routes. The same reservoirs that stored water for agriculture also served as defensive barriers around cities. Temple complexes weren't just religious sites. They were also astronomical observatories, administrative centers, and symbols of technological capability. So which empire demonstrated superior technological innovation? The comparison reveals two different approaches to engineering excellence. Roman technology was about standardization, replication, and systematic conquest of natural obstacles. Roman engineers developed solutions that could be applied across diverse environments and maintained by trained technicians throughout the empire. Khmer technology was about optimization, integration, and working with natural systems to achieve extraordinary results in a specific environment. Khmer engineers created bespoke solutions that were perfectly adapted to their unique geographical and climatic conditions. Both approaches achieved results that continue to amaze us today. Roman concrete has lasted millennia, and Roman roads still carry traffic. Khmer hydraulic systems supported massive populations, and Khmer temples demonstrate astronomical and architectural precision that rivals modern capabilities. In our next section, we'll explore how these technological achievements translated into cultural influence and the power to shape human civilization itself. True power is not just about armies and economies. It's about the ability to shape hearts and minds, to export your values and worldviews so effectively that other peoples voluntarily adopt your way of life. This is what modern strategists call soft power, but it's a concept as old as civilization itself. Both Rome and the Khmer Empire wielded this cultural influence with remarkable skill, though in vastly different ways. Imagine a young Gallic nobleman in 50 CE, barely 2 generations after Caesar's conquest. He speaks Latin fluently, wears a Roman toga, has received a Roman education, and dreams of serving in the Roman Senate. His grandfather fought against the Romans. He considers himself Roman. This transformation didn't happen through force. It happened through the irresistible appeal of Roman culture. Now picture a different scene. A Thai prince in the 12th century, visiting the magnificent temples of Angkor. He's mesmerized not just by the architectural splendor, but by the sophisticated Hindu-Buddhist philosophy, the elegant court rituals, and the advanced artistic techniques on display. When he returns home, he brings Khmer artisans, adopts Khmer religious practices, and models his own court on what he witnessed in Cambodia. These scenarios represent two of history's most successful examples of cultural influence, the Roman process of Romanization, and the Khmer Empire's role as the cultural heart of Southeast Asia. Let's start with Rome, because when it comes to cultural influence, few civilizations have matched the Romans' ability to make their culture attractive to conquered peoples. The genius of Roman cultural power wasn't that they forced their culture on others. It's that they made Roman culture so appealing that people wanted to become Roman themselves. The foundation of Roman cultural influence was the Latin language. Latin didn't just become the administrative language of the empire. It became the language of education, literature, and prestige. From Britain to Egypt, educated people learned Latin not because they had to, but because it opened doors to opportunity. Latin was the key to Roman citizenship, Roman education, and Roman careers. But here's what made Roman cultural influence truly powerful. It was systematic and scalable. Romans developed educational curricula, legal frameworks, and social institutions that could be replicated anywhere in the empire. Roman schools taught the same curriculum whether they were in Spain or Syria. Roman courts applied the same legal principles whether they were in Gaul or Greece. Roman cities followed the same urban planning principles whether they were in Britain or North Africa. The process of Romanization was remarkably effective because it offered real benefits to local elites. Adoption of Roman culture meant access to Roman markets, Roman education, Roman careers, and ultimately Roman citizenship, the most valuable legal status in the ancient world. Local aristocrats who embraced Roman culture could rise to positions of real power within the imperial system. Roman cultural influence extended far beyond politics and law. Roman literature, with authors like Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero, set standards for poetry, history, and rhetoric that influenced Western culture for centuries. Roman architectural styles spread throughout the empire, creating a visual uniformity that reinforced cultural unity. Roman religious practices, though tolerant of local variations, provided common festivals and rituals that bound diverse populations together. Perhaps most importantly, Romans created a vision of civilization that was both attractive and achievable. The Roman idea of civilization, with its emphasis on law, order, urban life, and cultural refinement, became the standard that other peoples aspired to. This wasn't just cultural imperialism, it was cultural magnetism. The lasting power of Roman cultural influence is evident today. Latin-derived languages are spoken by over 800 million people worldwide. Roman law forms the basis of legal systems across Europe and much of the developing world. Roman architectural principles still influence how we design public buildings. Roman political concepts like republicanism and citizenship continue to shape modern governments. Now let's examine Khmer cultural influence, which operated through completely different mechanisms but was equally powerful within its sphere of influence. The Khmer Empire became the cultural center of mainland Southeast Asia, radiating influence that shaped the development of Thai, Lao, Vietnamese, and Burmese civilizations. The foundation of Khmer cultural power was their synthesis of Hindu and Buddhist traditions with indigenous Southeast Asian culture. This wasn't just religious adoption, it was cultural innovation. The Khmer created a unique Hindu-Buddhist civilization that was sophisticated enough to compete with the great cultures of India and China, yet distinctively Southeast Asian in character. Khmer artistic achievement was simply extraordinary. The sculptural traditions developed at Angkor influenced art throughout Southeast Asia for centuries. The elegant, flowing lines of Khmer sculpture, the intricate bas-reliefs depicting Hindu and Buddhist mythology, and the architectural innovations of Angkor period temples became the standard for religious art across the region. But Khmer cultural influence went far beyond art and architecture. The Khmer developed sophisticated court ceremonies, administrative practices, and educational systems that neighboring kingdoms eagerly adopted. Khmer royal regalia, court titles, and ceremonial protocols spread throughout Southeast Asia. The concept of the Devaraja, or God King, became a standard model for Southeast Asian monarchy. Khmer cultural influence was particularly strong in the realm of literature and learning. The Khmer court attracted scholars, poets, and religious teachers from across Asia. Khmer inscriptions reveal a sophisticated literary culture that produced historical chronicles, religious texts, and poetic works in both Sanskrit and Khmer languages. These literary traditions influenced the development of Thai, Lao, and other Southeast Asian literatures. The Khmer Empire also served as a crucial cultural bridge between India and China. Khmer scholars and merchants facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions between these two great civilizations. This cultural brokerage role enhanced Khmer prestige and made Khmer culture attractive to peoples across Southeast Asia. Perhaps most significantly, the Khmer created a model of Southeast Asian civilization that demonstrated how indigenous cultures could absorb and adapt influences from great civilizations while maintaining their own distinctive character. This model influenced cultural development throughout the region and contributed to the emergence of distinctive Southeast Asian identities. The reach of Khmer cultural influence is still visible today. Thai classical dance, Cambodian court ceremonies, Lao religious architecture, and Vietnamese artistic traditions all show clear Khmer influences. The Ramayana epic, as interpreted through Khmer artistic traditions, remains central to Southeast Asian cultural identity. Modern national symbols, royal ceremonies, and artistic traditions throughout Southeast Asia trace their origins to innovations that began in the Khmer Empire. So which empire wielded greater cultural influence? The comparison reveals two different models of cultural power. Roman cultural influence was extensive and systematic, spreading across 3 continents and lasting for centuries through institutional frameworks that could be replicated anywhere. Roman culture became a universal standard that diverse peoples could adopt and adapt. Khmer cultural influence was intensive and innovative, creating a distinctive civilization that became the cultural heart of Southeast Asia. Khmer culture provided a model for how indigenous peoples could create sophisticated civilizations that could compete with the great powers of India and China while maintaining their own identity. Both models were remarkably successful within their respective spheres. Roman cultural influence created a shared civilization across the Mediterranean world and established cultural patterns that continue to influence Western civilization. Khmer cultural influence created the foundations of Southeast Asian civilization and established cultural patterns that continue to shape the region today. In our next section, we'll explore how these cultural achievements were supported by sophisticated administrative and governmental systems that kept these vast empires functioning effectively. Running an empire is not just about conquest and culture. It's about the mundane but crucial business of day-to-day governance. How do you collect taxes from millions of people? How do you settle disputes fairly across vast territories? How do you maintain loyalty among diverse populations who may have little in common except their subjugation to your rule? The answers to these questions reveal perhaps the most fundamental differences between Roman and Khmer approaches to power. Picture a Roman provincial governor in 150 CE sitting in his office in Lugdunum, modern Lyon, France. On his desk are reports from tax collectors, requests for legal rulings, military dispatches, and correspondence with Rome. He's implementing policies developed in the capital, applying laws codified by centuries of legal tradition, and managing a bureaucratic system that extends from his provincial headquarters down to individual cities and towns. This is governance as systematic administration. Now imagine a different scene. The god king Jayavarman VII conducting a royal audience in Angkor Wat. Petitioners prostrate themselves before the divine ruler, who embodies both earthly authority and cosmic order. His decisions aren't just administrative rulings, they're expressions of divine will that maintain harmony between the human and spiritual realms. This is governance as sacred ritual. These contrasting images represent two fundamentally different approaches to imperial administration, the Roman bureaucratic state and the Khmer theocratic monarchy. Roman administrative genius lay in creating systems that could govern diverse populations across enormous distances without requiring constant imperial oversight. The foundation of this system was the Roman concept of citizenship, a legal status that created bonds of loyalty and mutual obligation between the state and individuals, regardless of their ethnic or cultural background. Roman citizenship evolved from an exclusive privilege of the city of Rome to a unifying force across the empire. Citizens had legal rights that were protected throughout Roman territory, the right to trial, protection from arbitrary punishment, and access to Roman courts. The famous phrase, civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, wasn't just a statement of identity, it was a claim to legal protection that could be enforced from Britain to Egypt. But here's what made Roman citizenship truly revolutionary. It was expandable and inclusive. Unlike many ancient societies where legal status was determined by birth, Romans developed mechanisms for extending citizenship to conquered peoples. Auxiliary soldiers earned citizenship through military service. Local elites could gain citizenship through service to the empire. Entire communities could be granted citizenship as rewards for loyalty. This created a pathway for integration that transformed conquered enemies into invested stakeholders. The Roman provincial system was equally sophisticated. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a Roman administrator responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and implementing imperial policy. But provincial governors didn't rule through direct control. They worked through existing local institutions, adapting Roman administrative principles to local conditions. Roman legal administration was perhaps their greatest governmental achievement. Roman law wasn't just a collection of arbitrary rules, it was a systematic body of legal principles that could be applied consistently across diverse populations. The 12 Tables, developed in the 5th century BCE, evolved into a comprehensive legal system that addressed everything from property rights to criminal procedure. Roman legal principles like innocent until proven guilty, and the burden of proof lies with the accuser, became foundational concepts of Western jurisprudence. Roman taxation demonstrates the sophistication of their administrative capabilities. The empire developed multiple forms of taxation: land taxes, poll taxes, customs duties, and tribute payments, all carefully calibrated to local economic conditions. Roman tax collectors, though often unpopular, were part of a systematic revenue collection system that could extract resources from diverse economies while maintaining economic stability. The Roman bureaucracy extended beyond provincial administration to include specialized agencies for different aspects of imperial governance. The Annona system managed grain supplies for major cities. The cursus publicus provided imperial communications and transportation. Specialized departments handled military recruitment, public works, and financial administration. This wasn't just government. It was systematic public administration on a scale never before attempted. Now let's examine the Khmer administrative system, which took a completely different approach to imperial governance. Where Romans created systematic bureaucracy, the Khmer developed theocratic monarchy, a system where political authority derived from religious legitimacy and divine mandate. The foundation of Khmer governance was the concept of the Deva Raja, or God King. Khmer rulers weren't just political leaders, they were divine intermediaries who maintained cosmic order through their earthly rule. This wasn't merely ceremonial, it was the philosophical foundation of Khmer governmental authority. The king's legitimacy came not from conquest or election, but from his role as the earthly representative of Hindu and Buddhist deities. This divine authority allowed Khmer rulers to mobilize enormous resources for public projects. The construction of Angkor Wat, which required coordinating hundreds of thousands of workers over decades, was possible because the God King could command absolute obedience in the name of religious duty. Workers weren't just building a temple, they were participating in the creation of cosmic order on earth. Khmer administrative organization was closely integrated with religious institutions. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were administrative centers that managed vast estates, coordinated labor projects, and provided education and social services. The great temple complexes around Angkor functioned as integrated religious, administrative, economic institutions that could govern large populations without requiring extensive bureaucratic oversight. The Khmer system of royal inscriptions provides insight into their administrative sophistication. These stone inscriptions, found throughout the former empire, record royal edicts, land grants, and administrative decisions. They reveal a government that could manage complex land tenure systems, coordinate massive construction projects, and maintain detailed records of royal decisions and policies. Khmer provincial administration operated through a network of governors and local officials who represented royal authority in outlying regions. However, unlike Roman provincial governors who administered according to standardized procedures, Khmer officials operated within the framework of divine kingship, implementing royal will rather than systematic policy. The Khmer legal system was based on Hindu dharmic principles adapted to local conditions. Justice wasn't administered through systematic legal codes like Roman law, but through royal judgments that balanced religious principles, customary law, and royal prerogative. This created a more personalized but less predictable system of legal administration. So, which administrative system was more effective? The comparison reveals fundamental trade-offs between different approaches to governance. Roman administration was systematic, scalable, and adaptable to diverse conditions. It created institutions that could function effectively even when imperial authority was weak or distant. Roman administrative principles proved so effective that they continued to influence European governance long after the empire's fall. Khmer administration was intensive, personalized, and highly effective within its cultural context. The divine kingship system could mobilize enormous resources and maintain social cohesion through religious authority. However, it was more dependent on effective individual rulers and more vulnerable to succession crises or challenges to royal legitimacy. Roman administration prioritized legal consistency and systematic procedure, creating a framework that could integrate diverse populations under common institutions. Khmer administration prioritized cosmic harmony and divine authority, creating a system that could achieve remarkable results through religious motivation and royal charisma. Both systems were remarkably effective within their respective contexts. Roman administration created the institutional framework for a multi-ethnic, multicultural empire that lasted for centuries. Khmer administration created the governmental structure for a sophisticated Hindu-Buddhist civilization that dominated Southeast Asia for over 6 centuries. In our next section, We'll explore how these different approaches to governance shaped each empire's relationships with religion and the spiritual dimensions of imperial power. Religion wasn't just a private matter in ancient empires. It was a fundamental source of political legitimacy, social cohesion, and imperial power. The relationship between earthly authority and divine sanction shaped how rulers governed, how subjects obeyed, and how empires justified their dominance over vast populations. In this realm, the contrast between Rome and the Khmer Empire reveals two dramatically different approaches to wielding spiritual power. Imagine standing in the Pantheon in Rome around 150 CE. The massive dome soars above you, its oculus open to the heavens, while around the circular walls stand statues and shrines to gods from across the empire, Jupiter and Mars alongside Isis and Mithras Celtic deities next to Persian mysteries. This building embodies Roman religious policy, inclusive, adaptive, and pragmatic. The message is clear. All gods are welcome in the Roman Empire as long as they serve Roman purposes. Now picture yourself approaching Angkor Wat at dawn, watching the sun rise behind the temple's 5 central towers. This isn't just a religious building. It's a cosmic diagram in stone, representing Mount Meru, the center of the Hindu universe. Every carved relief, every architectural proportion, every sculptural detail serves to demonstrate that the Khmer king isn't just a ruler, he's a divine being who maintains the cosmic order through his earthly reign. These contrasting scenes represent two fundamentally different relationships between religion and imperial power: Roman religious pragmatism versus Khmer religious absolutism. Let's begin with Rome, because Roman religious policy was one of their most innovative and successful tools of imperial control. Early Roman religion was polytheistic, practical, and deeply connected to civic duty. Romans worshipped gods who protected the state, blessed agricultural cycles, and ensured military victory. Religion wasn't about personal salvation. It was about maintaining the divine favor necessary for Roman success. But here's what made Roman religious policy truly brilliant. It was inclusive and adaptive. As Rome conquered new territories, they didn't just impose Roman gods on conquered peoples. Instead, they practiced religious syncretism, identifying local deities with Roman gods and incorporating beneficial foreign religious practices into Roman tradition. The Egyptian goddess Isis became popular throughout the empire. The Persian mystery religion of Mithras attracted Roman soldiers. Celtic, Germanic, and other local deities were absorbed into the Roman pantheon. This religious tolerance wasn't just enlightened policy, it was strategic genius. By accepting local gods, Romans reduced religious resistance to their rule. Conquered peoples could maintain their spiritual traditions while acknowledging Roman political authority. This created a form of religious unity that supported political cohesion without requiring cultural uniformity. Roman emperor worship developed as another brilliant solution to the problem of legitimizing imperial authority across diverse populations. Beginning with Augustus, Roman emperors were deified after death, and eventually living emperors received divine honors. This wasn't just personality cult, it was a political institution that created a common focus of loyalty for subjects who might have little else in common. The genius of Roman emperor worship was its flexibility. In the Greek East, divine kingship was already familiar, so imperial divinity was easily accepted. In the Celtic West, where rulers were expected to have divine connections, emperor worship fit existing patterns. In Egypt, where pharaohs had been considered gods for millennia, Roman emperors simply stepped into an established role. But the most dramatic transformation in Roman religious policy came with the rise of Christianity. The conversion of Constantine in the early 4th century CE fundamentally changed the relationship between religion and imperial power. Christianity provided a universal religious framework that could unite the empire under a single spiritual authority while maintaining political unity under imperial rule. Christian Rome developed a new model of religious legitimacy based on divine appointment rather than divine nature. The emperor ruled not because he was a god, but because he was God's chosen representative on earth. This created a powerful synthesis of Christian theology and Roman political theory that would influence European political thought for centuries. Now let's examine the Khmer approach to religious power, which was based on completely different principles. Where Romans practiced religious inclusion and adaptation, the Khmer created a sophisticated synthesis of Hindu and Buddhist traditions that placed the king at the center of cosmic order. The foundation of Khmer religious power was the concept of the Devaraja, or God-King. This wasn't just a political title, it was a theological doctrine that made the king the earthly manifestation of Hindu deities, particularly Shiva or Vishnu. The king didn't just rule by divine right, he was literally divine, maintaining cosmic harmony through his earthly actions. This divine kingship was expressed through elaborate temple complexes that served as both religious centers and political symbols. Angkor Wat, built by Suryavarman VII in the early 12th century, was dedicated to Vishnu and designed as a representation of the Hindu cosmos. The temple's 5 central towers represent the peaks of Mount Meru, the center of the universe. The causeway approaches represent the bridge between the human and divine realms. Every aspect of the temple's design reinforces the king's role as divine intermediary. But Khmer religious synthesis went beyond Hindu traditions to incorporate Buddhist elements as well. Jayavarman VII, who ruled in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, embraced Mahayana Buddhism while maintaining the divine kingship model. The Bayon Temple, with its massive faces gazing in all directions, represents the king as the compassionate Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, watching over his subjects with divine benevolence. This Buddhist transformation demonstrates the sophistication of Khmer religious thought. Rather than abandoning Hindu traditions, Khmer religious leaders created a synthetic theology that incorporated Buddhist compassion with Hindu cosmic order. The king remained divine, but his divinity was expressed through Buddhist ideals of universal compassion and wisdom. Khmer temple building was perhaps the most dramatic expression of religious power in the ancient world. The construction of major temples required enormous resources and demonstrated the king's ability to command divine favor and human loyalty. These weren't just religious buildings, they were statements of political power that declared the king's divine status to subjects and rivals alike. The scale of Khmer temple construction was staggering. Angkor Wat alone covers over 400 acres and required an estimated 300,000 workers over several decades. The entire Angkor complex includes over 1,000 temples and monuments built over several centuries. This level of religious construction represented one of the largest sustained building programs in human history before the modern era. Khmer religious art reinforced the theological foundations of royal power through sophisticated iconographic programs. Temple sculptures and reliefs depicted Hindu and Buddhist mythology, but they consistently portrayed the king as divine protagonist. Royal portraits showed kings with the attributes of gods, while historical reliefs depicted royal victories as cosmic battles between good and evil. So which empire wielded greater religious power? The comparison reveals two successful but contrasting approaches to spiritual authority. Roman religious policy was inclusive, adaptive, and focused on maintaining political unity through religious diversity. This approach created broad-based loyalty and reduced religious resistance to imperial rule. Khmer religious power was exclusive, synthetic, and focused on expressing royal divinity through monumental architecture and sophisticated theology. This approach created intense loyalty and enabled extraordinary mobilization of resources for religious and political projects. Roman religious power was extensive, creating unity across diverse populations and vast territories. Khmer religious power was intensive, creating extraordinary devotion and enabling remarkable achievements within a more concentrated area. Both approaches were remarkably effective within their respective contexts. Roman religious policy helped maintain imperial unity for centuries across 3 continents. Khmer religious power enabled the construction of some of history's most magnificent religious monuments and sustained divine kingship for over 6 centuries. In our next section, we'll explore how these religious and political systems influence the daily lives of ordinary people in both empires. All this talk of grand empires, divine kings, and monumental architecture is fascinating, but what did it actually mean for ordinary people? How did imperial power translate into daily reality for the farmer in Gaul, the merchant in Alexandria, the rice cultivator in the Mekong Delta, or the artisan carving stones at Angkor? The true measure of an empire's power isn't just what it could build or conquer, it's how it shaped the lives of the millions of people who lived under its rule. Picture a typical day in the life of Marcus, a Roman citizen living in Lugdunum around 150 CE. He wakes up in his modest apartment, draws water from a public fountain supplied by Roman aqueducts, and walks to work along paved Roman streets. At the market, he buys bread subsidized by the imperial grain supply, pays with standardized Roman coins, and discusses the latest news from across the empire. In the evening, he might visit the public baths, a social institution that brings citizens of all classes together, or attend gladiatorial games funded by wealthy patrons seeking political favor. Now imagine Sophique, a rice farmer living near Angkor in the 12th century. She rises before dawn to work in paddies irrigated by the empire's sophisticated canal system. The rhythm of her life follows the monsoon seasons and the demands of the hydraulic agriculture that feeds over 1 million people in the Angkor region. Several times a year, she joins massive community labor projects, maintaining canals, constructing temples, or building roads, work that's both civic duty and religious merit. When she visits Angkor Wat for religious festivals, she's reminded of her place in a cosmic order where the God King maintains harmony between earth and heaven. These snapshots reveal how imperial power touched every aspect of daily life, but in remarkably different ways. Roman social structure was complex but surprisingly fluid for an ancient society. At the top were the senators and equestrians, the wealthy elite who governed the empire and controlled most of its wealth. Below them were ordinary citizens, who enjoyed legal rights and protections, but whose economic circumstances varied widely. At the bottom were slaves, who comprised perhaps 30% of the population in some regions, but who could earn or buy their freedom and become citizens themselves. But here's what made Roman society unique. Social mobility was possible. A freed slave could become wealthy through trade or craftsmanship. A provincial could rise to high office through military service or legal expertise. Roman citizenship itself could be earned through military service, loyal administration, or imperial favor. This created a society where talent and ambition could overcome humble origins, at least for some. Roman urban life was remarkably sophisticated. Cities throughout the empire featured public amenities that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. Public baths provided not just hygiene, but social interaction across class lines. Theaters and amphitheaters offered entertainment that was often free to citizens. Public fountains supplied fresh water, while public latrines provided sanitation. The famous Roman saying "bread and circuses" reflects the imperial policy of providing food subsidies and entertainment to urban populations, an early form of social welfare designed to maintain political stability. Roman family life was patriarchal but offered women more freedoms than many contemporary societies. Roman women could own property, conduct business, and divorce their husbands. Upper-class women often received good educations and wielded significant influence behind the scenes. Roman law protected family relationships and provided inheritance rights that created economic security for wives and children. Roman economic life created opportunities for ordinary people to participate in the empire's prosperity. Artisans could sell their goods across vast trade networks. Merchants could travel safely on Roman roads under the protection of Roman law. Farmers could access markets hundreds of miles away. The Roman economy created niches for countless specializations, from Syrian glass blowers to British wool merchants to African ivory carvers. Roman education was practical and accessible, at least for free citizens. Primary schools taught basic literacy and numeracy, while rhetoric schools prepared young men for legal and political careers. Even modest families could afford basic education for their children, creating literacy rates that were high for the ancient world. Now let's examine daily life in the Khmer Empire, which was structured around completely different principles. Khmer society was hierarchical and largely static, with social position determined by birth and religious merit rather than economic achievement or legal status. At the apex of Khmer society was the god king and the royal family, who lived in magnificent palaces surrounded by elaborate court ceremonies. Below them were the royal officials, military commanders, and high priests who administered the empire and maintained the temple complexes. The middle ranks included skilled artisans, merchants, and lower-level officials who kept the empire functioning. At the base were the rice farmers who comprised the vast majority of the population and whose agricultural surplus supported the entire system. Khmer social mobility was limited but possible through religious merit and royal service. Talented individuals could rise through temple hierarchies, military service, or administrative competence. However, social advancement was usually gradual and occurred within established frameworks rather than through individual entrepreneurship. Khmer daily life was closely integrated with religious observance and seasonal agricultural cycles. The empire's hydraulic agriculture created a rhythm of life that alternated between intensive farming during planting and harvest seasons and community labor projects during slack periods. These community projects weren't just economic activities, they were expressions of religious devotion that earned spiritual merit for participants. Khmer urban life centered around the great temple complexes that served as religious, administrative, and economic centers. Angkor Wat, the great walled city built by Jayavarman VII, housed hundreds of thousands of people in a carefully planned urban environment. The city featured sophisticated water management systems, wide boulevards, and monumental architecture that demonstrated royal power and cosmic order. Khmer family life was influenced by both Hindu traditions and indigenous Southeast Asian customs. Families were extended units that included multiple generations and collateral relatives. Women had significant roles in family economic activities and religious practices, though their public roles were more limited than in Roman society. Khmer marriage customs allowed for polygyny among the elite, but emphasized family stability and continuity for ordinary people. Khmer economic life was dominated by rice agriculture, but the empire also supported sophisticated craft industries. Khmer artisans created exquisite stone carvings, metalwork, textiles, and ceramics that were traded throughout Southeast Asia. The temple complexes employed thousands of skilled workers, sculptors, architects, engineers, and decorative artists who created some of history's most magnificent religious art. Khmer education was primarily religious and elite-focused. Temple schools taught Sanskrit, Hindu and Buddhist texts, and the skills necessary for temple administration. However, literacy was probably limited to the upper classes and religious specialists. Most knowledge was transmitted orally through traditional stories, religious teachings, and craft apprenticeships. So which empire provided a better life for ordinary people? The comparison reveals different models of social organization with distinct advantages and disadvantages. Roman society offered greater legal protections, more economic opportunities, and better public amenities for citizens. Roman citizenship provided legal rights and social benefits that were remarkable for the ancient world. However, Roman society also included massive slavery, significant economic inequality, and limited opportunities for non-citizens. The benefits of Roman civilization were unevenly distributed, with enormous differences between the experiences of urban citizens and rural subjects. Khmer society provided greater social stability and religious meaning for ordinary people. The hydraulic agriculture system ensured food security for large populations, while community labor projects created shared purposes that bound society together. Khmer religious culture provided spiritual frameworks that gave meaning to daily activities and social relationships. However, Khmer society also offered limited social mobility and concentrated wealth and power in the hands of the royal and religious elite. Ordinary people had fewer legal protections and economic opportunities than Roman citizens enjoyed. Both empires created sophisticated civilizations that supported large populations and remarkable cultural achievements. Roman society prioritized legal rights, economic opportunity, and urban amenities. Khmer society prioritized social harmony, religious devotion, and agricultural sustainability. In our next section, we'll explore how these different social systems influenced artistic and architectural achievements that continue to inspire us today. Now we reach perhaps the most visible and enduring dimension of imperial power, the artistic and architectural legacy that both empires left behind. These aren't just beautiful objects or impressive buildings. They're expressions of imperial ambition, technological capability, and cultural values that continue to inspire and amaze us nearly 2 millennia later. When we marvel at the Colosseum or stand in awe before Angkor Wat, we're witnessing the crystallization of imperial power in stone, the transformation of wealth and authority into timeless beauty. Consider this. The Pantheon in Rome has the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built, a record it held for over 1,300 years. Meanwhile, Angkor Wat covers more area than Vatican City and represents one of the most complex astronomical instruments ever constructed in stone. These achievements didn't happen by accident. They represent the pinnacle of what human civilization could accomplish when imperial resources, technical expertise, and artistic vision combined in pursuit of immortal grandeur. But here's what makes this comparison truly fascinating. These two empires approached art and architecture from fundamentally different philosophical perspectives, creating legacies that reveal completely different concepts of beauty, power, and permanence. Let's begin with Roman artistic and architectural achievement, which was characterized by practical magnificence and engineering innovation. Roman architecture wasn't just about creating beautiful buildings. It was about solving complex technical problems while making bold statements about Roman power and civilization. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE, represents Roman architectural philosophy at its finest. This wasn't just an amphitheater. It was a marvel of engineering that could seat 50,000 spectators with sophisticated crowd control systems, retractable awnings, underground machinery for staging elaborate spectacles, and hydraulic systems that could flood the arena for naval battles. The building combined advanced engineering with architectural grandeur to create a structure that was both functional and awe-inspiring. But the Colosseum was just one example of Roman architectural innovation. The Pantheon, built under Hadrian around 125 CE, demonstrates Roman mastery of concrete construction and dome architecture. The building's perfect proportions, the diameter of the dome equals the height of the building, create a sense of mathematical harmony that has influenced architects for centuries. The oculus at the dome's center isn't just decorative. It's a sophisticated lighting system that changes the building's atmosphere throughout the day. Roman aqueduct architecture represents perhaps their greatest achievement in combining engineering excellence with aesthetic beauty. The Pont du Gard, built in the 1st century CE, carries water across a valley using 3 tiers of arches that create a rhythmic pattern of extraordinary elegance. This structure is simultaneously a work of art and a piece of infrastructure that supplied fresh water to the city of Nimes for centuries. Roman urban planning created architectural environments that were both practical and magnificent. Roman cities featured wide boulevards, public squares, bath complexes, theaters, and markets arranged according to rational grid patterns. The Forum Romanum wasn't just a marketplace. It was a carefully designed urban space that expressed Roman values of order, prosperity, and civic pride. Roman artistic achievement extended beyond architecture to include sculpture, painting, and decorative arts that set standards for Western artistic tradition. Roman portraiture achieved a level of psychological realism that wouldn't be matched again until the Renaissance. Roman historical reliefs, like those on Trajan's column, created narrative art that could tell complex stories in stone. Roman frescoes and mosaics decorated both public buildings and private homes, with scenes that ranged from mythological epics to everyday life. Roman artistic production was remarkably diverse and widespread. Roman workshops produced art for markets throughout the empire, creating a shared visual culture that reinforced political unity. Roman artistic techniques and styles spread to every corner of the empire, influencing local artistic traditions while maintaining recognizable Roman characteristics. Now let's turn to Khmer artistic and architectural achievement, which approached beauty and permanence from completely different philosophical foundations. Where Roman art was practical and diverse, Khmer art was spiritual and integrated. Where Roman architecture solved engineering problems, Khmer architecture expressed cosmic order. Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century CE, represents perhaps the most sophisticated integration of architecture, astronomy, and religious symbolism ever achieved. This temple complex isn't just large, though at over 400 acres it's enormous. It's precisely calibrated to represent Hindu cosmology in stone. The temple's orientation, proportions, and decorative program create a three-dimensional mandala that serves as both architectural space and spiritual diagram. The precision of Angkor Wat's construction is staggering. The temple's central towers align perfectly with astronomical events, particularly the spring equinox when the sun rises directly behind the central spire when viewed from the western causeway. The temple's proportions correspond to Hindu cosmological measurements, with distances and heights that represent cosmic time cycles and sacred geography. But Angkor Wat was just the centerpiece of a vast architectural program that transformed the entire Angkor region into a sacred landscape. The Bayon Temple, built by Jayavarman VII in the late 12th century, features over 200 massive faces carved in stone, representations of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara that gaze serenely in all directions. These faces weren't just decorative, they created a psychological environment that reinforced the king's role as compassionate divine protector. Khmer temple architecture achieved extraordinary technical sophistication without using mortar or mechanical lifting devices. The precision stone-cutting techniques employed at Angkor allowed massive blocks weighing several tons to fit together with tolerances measured in millimeters. The transportation and placement of these stones required engineering solutions that remain impressive even by modern standards. Khmer sculptural achievement reached extraordinary heights in the bas-reliefs that cover temple walls throughout the Angkor complex. The gallery of bas-reliefs at Angkor Wat includes over 1,200 meters of carved narrative scenes depicting Hindu epics, historical events, and mythological stories. These aren't just decorations. They're sophisticated narrative art that required master craftsmen capable of creating coherent storytelling programs across vast architectural surfaces. Khmer artistic production extended beyond stone carving to include sophisticated traditions in metalwork, textiles, and dance. Khmer bronze casting techniques produced religious sculptures and decorative objects of extraordinary quality. Khmer textile traditions created silk fabrics that were traded throughout Southeast Asia. Khmer classical dance, developed in royal courts, created performance traditions that are still practiced today. The integration of water management with architectural design represents a unique Khmer achievement. Temple complexes weren't just religious buildings. They were integrated with the hydraulic systems that managed water resources throughout the empire. The moats surrounding Angkor Wat and other temples weren't just decorative. They were functional components of the larger water management system that made the entire Angkor region habitable. So which empire created a more impressive artistic and architectural legacy? The comparison reveals two different approaches to transforming imperial power into enduring beauty. Roman artistic achievement was diverse, innovative, and focused on solving practical problems while creating magnificent spaces for human activity. Roman architecture and art established technical and aesthetic standards that influenced Western civilization for centuries. Khmer artistic achievement was integrated, spiritual, and focused on expressing cosmic order through precisely calibrated architectural and sculptural programs. Khmer art and architecture created some of the most sophisticated religious complexes ever built, demonstrating extraordinary technical skill in service of spiritual and political purposes. Roman artistic legacy is extensive, influencing artistic traditions across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Roman architectural innovations like the arch, dome, and concrete construction became foundational elements of Western architecture. Roman artistic techniques and styles continued to influence European art through the Renaissance and beyond. Khmer artistic legacy is intensive, creating a concentrated achievement that represents one of the pinnacles of human artistic and architectural accomplishment. The Angkor complex remains one of the most impressive archaeological sites in the world, demonstrating levels of technical and artistic sophistication that continue to amaze modern visitors. Both legacies represent the transformation of imperial power into timeless beauty. Roman art and architecture express confidence, innovation, and practical magnificence. Khmer art and architecture express spiritual devotion, cosmic harmony, and technical perfectionism. In our final section, we'll examine how these artistic achievements reflect the broader question of which empire ultimately wielded greater power and left a more lasting impact on human civilization. After journeying through military might, economic power, technological innovation, cultural influence, administrative systems, religious authority, daily life, and artistic achievement, we finally arrive at the ultimate question. Which empire was truly more powerful, ancient Rome or the Khmer Empire of Cambodia? The answer isn't as simple as counting soldiers or measuring territories. True power lies in the ability to shape the future, to influence civilizations that come after, and to leave a legacy that endures long after the last emperor has fallen and the final temple has been abandoned to the jungle. Let's start with a sobering reality. Both of these mighty empires eventually collapsed. Rome fell to barbarian invasions, internal strife, and economic decay. The Western Roman Empire ended in 476 CE, though the Eastern Byzantine Empire continued for another 1,000 years. The Khmer Empire gradually declined due to environmental challenges, warfare with neighboring kingdoms, and shifts in trade routes, with Angkor finally abandoned in the 15th century. If we measure power by longevity alone, both empires ultimately failed the test of time. But here's where the story gets fascinating. The death of an empire does not end its power. Sometimes, the greatest imperial achievement is what survives after the armies have disbanded and the palaces have crumbled. This is where we see the most dramatic difference between Roman and Khmer legacies. Roman influence on subsequent civilizations is simply staggering in its scope and depth. The Roman Empire didn't just disappear, it transformed into the foundation of Western civilization. Roman law became the basis for legal systems across Europe and much of the developing world. The Napoleonic Code, which influenced legal systems from Louisiana to Japan, was fundamentally based on Roman legal principles. Today, when you have the right to legal representation, the presumption of innocence, or protection from double jeopardy, you're benefiting from Roman legal innovations. Roman political concepts shape the development of modern democracy and republicanism. The United States Constitution incorporates Roman ideas about separation of powers, checks and balances, and representative government. The very word republic comes from the Latin res publica, the Roman concept of government serving the public good. Modern democratic institutions, from the British Parliament to the French Senate, trace their conceptual origins to Roman precedents. Roman cultural influence permeated European civilization so thoroughly that it's almost invisible today. Latin remained the language of scholarship, law, and religion in Europe for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, are literally evolved forms of Latin spoken by over 800 million people today. Even Germanic languages like English are heavily influenced by Latin vocabulary and concepts. Roman engineering principles continued to influence construction and urban planning for centuries. Renaissance architects studied Roman buildings and incorporated Roman design principles into their work. Modern cities still follow Roman urban planning concepts, with grid street patterns, public squares, and separation of residential and commercial districts. When you drive on a highway, use a sewer system, or live in a city with zoned districts, you're experiencing the continuation of Roman innovations. The Roman Empire's transformation into the Byzantine Empire and its influence on the development of Christianity created religious and cultural legacies that shaped world history. The Catholic Church preserved and transmitted Roman administrative practices, legal concepts, and educational traditions throughout the Middle Ages. The Holy Roman Empire, founded by Charlemagne in 800 CE, explicitly claimed to be the continuation of Roman imperial authority. Even Roman military influence continued through history. European military traditions, from medieval knighthood to modern officer training, incorporated Roman concepts of discipline, training, and strategic thinking. The very concept of professional armies with standardized training and equipment traces back to Roman military innovations. Now let's examine the Khmer legacy, which operated on a different scale but was equally profound within its sphere of influence. The Khmer Empire's impact on Southeast Asian civilization was comprehensive and lasting. Khmer architectural techniques, artistic styles, and urban planning concepts influenced temple construction throughout Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar for centuries after Angkor's abandonment. Khmer religious and cultural traditions became foundational elements of Southeast Asian identity. The synthesis of Hindu and Buddhist traditions, pioneered by Khmer civilization, became the standard religious framework for much of mainland Southeast Asia. Thai, Lao, and Cambodian royal ceremonies still follow protocols developed during the Angkor period. Classical dance traditions throughout the region trace their origins to Khmer court performances. Khmer hydraulic engineering principles influenced water management practices throughout Southeast Asia. The sophisticated understanding of monsoon hydrology and rice cultivation techniques developed in the Khmer Empire became the foundation for agricultural systems that continue to feed millions of people today. Modern irrigation projects in Thailand and Vietnam still incorporate principles first developed by Khmer engineers. The Khmer Empire's role as a cultural bridge between India and China created lasting patterns of cultural exchange that shaped Southeast Asian civilization. The region's distinctive ability to absorb and synthesize influences from multiple great civilizations while maintaining its own identity traces back to innovations first developed in the Khmer Empire. But here's where we must confront the geographical and temporal limitations of Khmer influence. While Roman legacy spread across 3 continents and influenced civilizations from Britain to Ethiopia, Khmer influence remained primarily concentrated in Southeast Asia. While Roman cultural influence continued to shape European development for over 1,000 years after the empire's fall, Khmer cultural influence, though profound, was more geographically constrained. This brings us to the fundamental question of how we measure imperial power. If we measure power by territorial extent and duration, Rome wins decisively. The Roman Empire controlled more territory, governed more people, and maintained political unity for a longer period than the Khmer Empire. If we measure power by technological and artistic achievement, the comparison becomes more complex. Roman innovations in law, engineering, and administration were more widely applicable and influential. Khmer achievements in hydraulic engineering, architectural precision, and religious art were more specialized but reached extraordinary heights within their domains. If we measure power by cultural influence and lasting legacy, Rome again appears dominant due to the global reach and enduring impact of Roman innovations. Roman concepts, institutions, and cultural patterns continue to influence billions of people today, while Khmer influence, though profound, remained more regionally concentrated. But perhaps most importantly, if we measure power by the ability to create sustainable, prosperous civilizations that enhanced human welfare, both empires demonstrated remarkable success within their respective contexts. Roman civilization created unprecedented opportunities for economic advancement, legal protection, and cultural development across vast territories. Khmer civilization achieved extraordinary population densities and living standards through innovative environmental management and agricultural techniques. So here's our verdict. Rome was the more powerful empire in terms of territorial extent, duration, and global influence. Roman innovations in law, government, engineering, and culture had broader and more lasting impact on human civilization. The Roman Empire's ability to integrate diverse populations across 3 continents and establish institutions that continued to influence world development for centuries after the empire's fall represents one of history's greatest achievements in imperial power. However, this verdict comes with important qualifications. The Khmer Empire achieved levels of environmental management, architectural precision, and cultural synthesis that were arguably superior to Roman achievements in these specific domains. Within Southeast Asia, Khmer influence was as profound and lasting as Roman influence was in Europe and the Mediterranean. The comparison ultimately reveals that imperial power takes many forms and can be measured by many standards. Rome excelled at extensive power, controlling vast territories and diverse populations through adaptable institutions. The Khmer Empire excelled at intensive power, achieving extraordinary results through sophisticated techniques perfectly adapted to their specific environment. Both empires demonstrate that true power lies not just in conquest and control, but in the ability to create lasting value for human civilization. In that sense, both Rome and the Khmer Empire were powerful beyond measure. As we reach the end of our epic journey through time, comparing the mighty Roman Empire with the magnificent Khmer Empire of ancient Cambodia, we've discovered that the question, which was more powerful, reveals as much about the nature of power itself as it does about these two remarkable civilizations. We began by exploring military might, where Roman legions with their disciplined formations and engineering prowess faced off against Khmer war elephants and specialized riverine warfare. Both developed military systems perfectly adapted to their environments. Rome for conquest across diverse terrains, the Khmer for domination of Southeast Asian waterways and jungles. Economically, we saw two radically different models of prosperity. Rome built a trade-based empire spanning 3 continents, creating the ancient world's first truly global economy with standardized currency and massive commercial networks. The Khmer Empire created an agricultural powerhouse through revolutionary hydraulic engineering, achieving population densities that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. Technologically, both empires achieved marvels that continue to amaze us today. Roman concrete has grown stronger over 2 millennia, while Roman roads still carry traffic. Khmer engineers moved millions of tons of stone with mathematical precision and created water management systems that supported over 1 million people in a single urban area. Culturally, Rome's influence spread across 3 continents through systematic Romanization, creating shared institutions and values that bound diverse peoples together. The Khmer Empire became the cultural heart of Southeast Asia, synthesizing Hindu and Buddhist traditions with indigenous culture to create a distinctive civilization that influenced the entire region. In governance, Rome developed bureaucratic systems that could administer vast territories through standardized procedures and legal frameworks. The Khmer perfected divine kingship, where god-kings mobilized enormous resources through religious authority and cosmic legitimacy. Both empires wielded religious power masterfully. Rome through inclusive syncretism and strategic emperor worship, the Khmer through sophisticated theological synthesis and monumental temple construction that proclaimed royal divinity. For ordinary people, Roman citizenship offered legal protections and economic opportunities unprecedented in the ancient world, while Khmer society provided spiritual meaning and agricultural security within a harmonious cosmic order. Artistically, both civilizations created timeless masterpieces, Roman engineering marvels like the Colosseum and Pantheon, Khmer spiritual achievements like Angkor Wat and the Bayon, each expressing different philosophies about beauty, power, and permanence. Our final verdict recognizes Rome as more powerful in terms of territorial extent, duration, and global influence. Roman innovations in law, government, and culture continue to shape billions of lives today. Yet the Khmer Empire achieved extraordinary heights in environmental management, architectural precision, and cultural synthesis that were arguably superior within their domains. Perhaps the most profound lesson from this comparison is that true imperial power takes many forms. Rome excelled at extensive power, controlling vast territories through adaptable institutions. The Khmer Empire mastered intensive power, achieving extraordinary results through perfect adaptation to their environment. Both empires ultimately demonstrate that the greatest power lies not in conquest alone, but in the ability to create lasting value for human civilization. In that eternal measure, both Rome and the Khmer Empire achieved true immortality. not through the survival of their political institutions, but through their enduring contributions to human knowledge, culture, and achievement. Their legacy reminds us that the most powerful empires are those that make humanity itself more capable, more creative, and more civilized.